right, thank you to the candidates. At this point, we're going to open the floor to questions next.
My name is Mona Hill. I'm here as a representative of Amnesty International in Regina. The situation of the Lubicon Cree in northern Alberta, which has been the subject of concern for United Nations human rights bodies since 1990, has become a symbol of Canada's failure to abide by international human rights standards when it comes to Indigenous peoples. Now that Canada has officially endorsed the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, what will be your party's first step toward implementing this important human rights standard? And what measures will you take to ensure that outstanding recommendations made to Canada by UN human rights bodies, such as, in the case of the Lubicon Cree, are effectively addressed?
Thank you for that question. Without a doubt, we have a lot of work to do with working with Aboriginal people and their lifestyle in reinforcing the fact that they have a place and we should be honoring whatever kind of treaties are in place and making sure that we supply educational opportunities, healthcare opportunities, and everything else that's needed by those folks. I guess all I can say to you is that it's certainly under review. Minister Duncan has taken over that portfolio about 3 months ago, and I think we see some decided change, and it's changed for the better.
Well, thank you for that question, Mona. And I think when we're talking about the status of First Nations people, and it's important to recognize the nation, that last word, nation. We're dealing with treaty obligations here, but we're also dealing with Section 35 constitutional rights with respect to First Nations and Métis and Aboriginal peoples. And it is absolutely shameful right now that there are hundreds of reserves in this country that are under boil water advisories, and that this has been going on for decades. And it's shameful that there are women in this province, in particular in northern Saskatchewan, women that don't have access to family doctors in respect to maternal health, and that in Canada, the rate of women who die in childbirth is worse than it is in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And for me, I think that's a little embarrassing, and we have to deal with that. What we're calling for, as your MP, is to build those linkages, deal with First Nations people on a basis of justice and trust, rebuild those relationships, make sure that we can adequately provide the infrastructure to get all those reserves off boil water advisories, and implement legislation that takes away the punitive 2% quota cap for First Nations people wanting to enter universities. Yeah. So, and additionally, implement legislation in accordance with Shannon's dream to make sure First Nations people have adequate access to all levels of K-12 education, to make sure that they're not left out, that they're equal partners in this country, and that we can move ahead. We're all different in this province, but we're all in this thing together, and I think it's time we showed that element of trust to First Nations people in the future. Thank you.
Without speaking directly to the Lubicon, I'll do that in the second half. I think once upon a time, before the government's just come to pass, we had something called the Kelowna Accord that the Liberal government at the time put a lot of time and effort into. It was promptly put into a garburator immediately after Mr. Harper and the Conservatives took over government. Does anybody have any idea how many times that file in Native Affairs has changed hands since 2006? Because I've certainly, well, I'm asking the question to be quite frank. You'll find I'm a real two-way guy, so work with me. But I do know that in particular the Aboriginal Affairs or Native Affairs files is passed hands several times. And just lately it's passed again, and we're told things are going to get better, and we're told that someone is getting their head wrapped around it and working on it. And well, that really doesn't cut it with me, because quite frankly, the minister of whatever file there is takes things under the advisement or advice of the folks that work for him, the deputy ministers on down. They know full well what needs to be done. I just think they're not willing to commit the resources to take care of it. Regarding the Lubicon in northern Alberta, I think that regardless of who you are in this country, all Canadians are equal. We have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms that dictate that, separate from treaty rights, whether it's 4 or 8 or wherever they're at. The fact of the matter is they're all equal, and I think the problem with the Lubicon in northern Alberta, I think, has a little bit more to do with what's under their land rather than what we're prepared to take care of with regards to their treatment.
Well, thank you very much for your question. I think of the things that I have seen come from Parliament and from our Prime Minister since the last election. Of all the things, I think one of the things that scared me the most was when I heard Harper state that Canada has no history of colonialism. Now, this is our Prime Minister that said this. Canada definitely has a history of colonialism, just in case you were confused, as our Prime Minister was trying to do. I think that, first of all, we need to recognize, we need somebody who is aware of our history of colonialism in order for solutions to come forward. That's a definite prerequisite. Our platform, Vision Green, it's a very long document. It has policy on every area, and too much policy for me to read in this short amount of time, but I'm going to read a little. Green Party MPs will honour Canada's financial responsibility and the Aboriginal rights, treaty rights, and other rights of Aboriginal peoples, including their inherent rights of self-government. In partnership with Aboriginal peoples, work toward the creation of an Aboriginal Lands and Treaties Tribunal Act to establish an independent body to decide on specific claims, ensure that treaty negotiations are conducted and financed fairly, and ensure that treaty negotiations and claims resolutions do not result in the extinguishment of Aboriginal and treaty rights. Immediately implement the land claims agreements already negotiated and languishing for lack of funding, particularly for First Nations in the territories. Review all existing federal policies on self-government in consultation with Aboriginal representatives to ensure they are achieving the goals of Aboriginal people. Ensure that negotiations of treaties and self-government are not based on the extinguishment of Aboriginal titles and rights and on assimilation, but on reconciliation of rights and title, and that negotiations recognize the diversity of traditional self-governance. I could go on, but I see my moderator giving me the nod. And in addition to that, I stood beside students at the First Nations University of Canada while they were concerned about the future of their school. It was a hard experience for us all to go through, and I think that that's another area where Aboriginal education needs more money, not less. Absolutely.
My name is Ron Fletcher, and I live here. I used to live in Moose Jaw. And I have a question primarily for Ray, but I also want Noah to respond. And that is, very simply, the tax cuts you talk about for the corporations. What services that you label waste will you cut to pay for those corporate tax cuts for the rich? That's what I would really like to hear.
Thank you for that question. The actuaries have brought back the results of their looking at cutting back on taxes and have suggested to the government that it's within the realm of doable, that the tax decrease will stimulate employment, will stimulate hiring of more people. More people will pay into income tax and other taxes that we all pay, like PSD and GST, so that there's a break-even point, and the break-even point favors small business as well as corporate business in a tax alleviation problem. So it's been well thought out. It's been presented to the accountants of Eastern Ontario and some accountants in Western Ontario too, and they have assured the government that it is a doable proposition. So,
Ron, you touched on a very important point, and I must say, it's as if with that answer we've gone into a time warp to the Ronald Reagan era of trickle-down economics, which has pretty much been discredited by the events of the last 20 years. Your point is taken. How have average everyday citizens, how have you benefited by the fact that we've given $60 billion in tax cuts to the Royal Bank, to TD Bank, to Encana, while your cost of living keeps going up? And in fact, as it relates to small business, I'm a small business professional. We've increased payroll taxes on small business in the last 5 years. What we're proposing, the NDP as your candidate, as your MP, is I'm going to cut the tax rate on small businesses 2%, from 11% to 9%. Because small businesses, look at the businesses here in Cathedral, businesses like the Paper Umbrella. Those are the engines of our economy. That's what makes us unique, is our small businesses. We're going to cut taxes on the small businesses, and our budget that we proposed, our platform, is fully costed out using the same statistics that Department of Finance that Ray referred to, and we will pay down the deficit in quicker fashion than the Conservative Party, but without giving handouts to big banks that have jacked your user fees, jacked your credit card interest rates, at the same time as not passing any savings down to you as the consumer. So we need to focus on cutting taxes for individuals, not for the big banks that have been profiting and taking TARP money, I might add too, so from the United States bailout. So what we need to be focusing on are individuals. Let's cut down on the GST on your home heating bill. Let's cut the small business tax rate. Let's focus on issues that are important to average everyday Canadians, because what makes Canada great are people, not the banks. Thank you.
Russ, if you'd like to respond, go for it. It's up to you, we're on.
Oh, fair enough, I'm going to pass on it. I just thought it was Ray and Noah was the question. Everyone hear me? Sorry. Well, we're on the record as stating that we want to roll back to the level it was at in 2010 as far as corporate tax cuts are concerned. There's a competitive advantage with a couple of exceptions in the OECD with regards to where Canada's tax rates are at. That's based on last year's value, rather than going down to 15%. I think the big issue is the questioner did have a valid point, is taking it the next steps. It's unaffordable. We do have to roll back from where we are now. I personally don't believe that rolling back any further at this point is prudent or necessary, because it does have a somewhat chilling effect on the business, especially big business economy. We believe there should be tax cuts for smaller businesses, whether or not they're earmarked for specifics. I'm not going to speak to those exactly right now, but definitely we have to roll it back to where it was last year to pay for the program spending that's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. The Green Party definitely understands that we need to end corporate subsidies. Their corporate tax breaks were astonishing to see additional corporate tax breaks. Back in the 1970s, half of the public purse, the taxation dollars that our government took in and that were available for spending on our social programs, half of those tax dollars came from citizens, half from corporations. Today, citizens, 90% plus, corporations, continuously less and less and less. Why? It just astonishes me. We need to be supporting our local economy. We need to think about economic sustainability. Why are we subsidizing the most profitable product on earth, a barrel of oil? Of course, it's not good economics. And you will find in the Green Party's plan, our party tabled our deficit cutting plan with the Parliamentary Budget Office to ensure that we did our homework and that our numbers will hold. And we will eliminate corporate subsidies. So clearly, the economics are good. The economics for a smart economy, a green economy, will hold, and they do not need corporate tax breaks to make our economy keep on ticking. In fact, there will be more money in our hands as citizens with the Green Party's economic plan. Thank you.